Born in 1985 and raised in Hamilton, Ohio, author of Atomic Habits James Clear earned his biomechanics degree from Denison University. He went on to publish one of the most widely recognized self-help books of all time after years of working with athletes and executives towards better careers. Atomic Habits, published in 2018, has sold over 15 million copies worldwide and has been translated in over 50 languages.
Everyone, and welcome to the Two Retired Homeschoolers podcast. I'm Rebecca, and this is Holly.
Hi. It is so awkward to say the hi part. It is objectively worse for the person not introducing the episode.
Yeah, I think both are awful. I hate introducing, and I hate being introduced.
So we decided to throw in a special for y'all this week. And we might keep this up, maybe not, we'll see. But anyway, we were just going to bring up a few embarrassing moments from our week because we're homeschoolers and I feel like homeschoolers just embarrass themselves all the time. So mine is, the other day I was mowing the lawn and I kid you not, I was going along this one fence line and I run into this bush I'd never seen before. And I was freaking out because I was like, oh my gosh, it's a tiny little baby raspberry bush. And then all of a sudden, because the berries on it were so bright red, and I was like, this is the best thing that has ever happened to me. And then I looked a little closer, and there were blackberries too. And I was like, wait, no, it can't be that raspberries and blackberries grow on the same bush. So that is my embarrassing moment. What about yours, Rebecca?
Yeah, I also had an incident with a vehicle. It was actually just today. I just got out of the shower before we started this podcast, trailing Naiad. Not really. I washed all the Naiad off of me. But, I may have put a vehicle into a pond. And if you're thinking, Rebecca, this sounds like something you did several summers ago. Yeah, it is something I did several summers ago. And I just did it again. Actually, it was the lake that time. But yeah, this time I didn't put it. I left it alone for 2 seconds and it put itself in the pond. Yeah, it was a golf cart, not a car also. Everything was scaled down, but golf cart went in the pond.
That's good.
It was Rebecca's fault. Rebecca hiked back. Rebecca got in the pond and swam in the pond and got covered in Naiad.
No. And just to clarify, the last car that this happened to was notoriously named the Submarine, and the Submarine never made a full comeback, only partial.
Yeah, she putters around sometimes when the mice haven't chewed through her spark plug wires, but she's kind of, she doesn't have any chill anymore. She's always just like running at full throttle, like, even if you have her in neutral, you can hear the engine just like roaring. I don't blame my homeschooler upbringing for my bad driving abilities. I just blame being a girl. I can't believe I just said that.
Okay, I'm editing that out.
Something that makes me mad. Like, it's one of the stupid things that I know shouldn't make me mad that people make that joke. Well, what makes me mad is that they actually believe it. Like, people genuinely believe that women are worse drivers. And I understand where the stereotype comes from, simply because I've known women who are very bad drivers, and I've never known men who are as bad of drivers as the worst women drivers. But there's a lot of good women drivers and a lot of bad male drivers, so it's, yeah.
Although I think the most reckless drivers, statistically, like the worst of the worst, are men. Because those are the same guys that are like doing wheelies in the middle of the highway on their motorcycles and getting terrible concussions from skateboarding and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's almost like they're bad in different ways. Like, a bad male driver is usually bad because he's reckless, and a bad female driver is usually bad because she's, like, incompetent or just like unaware of her surroundings. So she does reckless things without realizing that they're reckless. The guys are doing it on purpose. So maybe that makes them more stupid. I don't know.
Yeah, it seems that driving is just, the male brain is naturally inclined to do well with it. It was a huge learning curve for me, and it did not come naturally.
I know a lot of very, very competent male drivers. Like, they're just competent with a car and a trailer and a truck. And it's like, why are you so good at this? Like, I don't understand. But yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm definitely a safe driver, unless there's a body of water nearby.
I'm an unskilled driver who prioritizes safety above all else, and that just kind of compensates for incompetence.
And you brought us safely through Colorado. I slept for like 10 hours while you drove through the mountains. And you...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I still think about that sometimes. Like, after all the crap that Emily and I gave you about being a bad driver, we just let you drive us through the mountains at night, and you didn't kill us.
For 10 hours straight.
Yeah, when we were all sleep deprived.
And also, I just want to say, in my defense, I drove perfectly that whole night, and there were some interesting situations I found myself in on various highways. But anyway, it wasn't until after you guys woke up that I made some sort of mistake. I forgot if it was I think it was with merging, but we can move on. We should probably talk about this book now. Okay, so
Holly hates me and made me read another self-help book, but at least this time there wasn't a robot lady reading it to me.
Well, Can't Stop Thinking was so successful. And by the way, the self-help books will keep coming. I have another one I'm ready to read, so that'll happen eventually. So keep hope, oh dear listeners.
Pray for me, dear listeners.
I am on your side. Always remember that. So let's start with your first impressions.
My first impressions of this book are... it has lots of, like, good, solid advice. Like, yeah, this works in life. But it explains everything, like, 5 times more times than it needs to explain it. And then it gives you, like, 5 times more examples than you need. And then it, like, repeats itself 5 times more than you needed it to be repeated. And then also he, like, gets really systematic with things so that you're like, okay, so I'm supposed to just turn my entire life into a spreadsheet and check off all the boxes of how I, like, do everything. It's like, I can't live life like this, so that's not helpful. But the, like, basic principles that he gives are, like, good and useful. Like, but again, it's not really a me book because I pretty much know how to form good habits and get rid of bad ones. I've been slowly, working on it all my life, figuring it out. Like, so everything that he's saying, or not everything that he's saying, some of what he said was new to me, but a lot of what he said was like, yeah, this is good advice. I already do this. I don't need to be told this by a book 5 times. That's how I felt.
Yeah, I would say most people instinctively already know the lessons he puts into words into this book, but just having it put into words can help. But anyway, I'm going to use first impressions as an excuse to just discuss the structure of the book, because this book was one of the most structured books I've ever read. Like,
that's what I'm saying. It's so structured.
Yes.
Not only is his book incredibly structured, he wants your entire life to be like structured, like layers of structures within structures within structures. And it's like, you have a sheet for this and a list for that and a checklist for this and a checklist for these things on this checklist, and this all fits under this heading, which fits under this heading. Like, oh my goodness, how can you go through your life thinking about this? And make sure that you designate
times to go back to your checklists. Like, prioritize this. Which is amazing. But yeah, we'll discuss these 4 laws because they really are the premise for this book a little later. But he has 4 main laws that he divides the book up into. So 4 main segments. And then within these 4 main segments, he has like little sub-segments. I don't know if that's an accurate way to put it, but after every chapter, he has a chart. And the chart grows a little more after every chapter because it's like you're supposed to read through the chart after every chapter about what every chapter beforehand said. And also every paragraph, it feels like he's always bringing it back to the main point. And also he has a website that he constantly refers to. Like, if you need a chart for this, you can go to my website. Which I just think is darling. Like, definitely overdone, but darling. And so yeah. Another thing I really appreciated about this book is it starts each chapter with a story, which is just a great way to reel you into the chapter. And then he finishes out every chapter with, like throughout the chapter, he's giving advice, obviously, but like he always ends it with this moral feeling piece of advice that just feels very, I don't know how to put it into words, but it just kind of grounds you and makes you like feel romantic about everything you just learned. And he also keeps the chapters just short enough that it's like you get this little spurt of dopamine because you're like, oh, I just finished a chapter and that hardly took any time at all. I can go read another one real quick. So it's easy to keep turning the pages because of that.
No, it's not easy to keep turning the pages. Sorry.
I wonder if they can guess who liked this book and who didn't. Like most self-help books, it was definitely over-explaining pretty much the whole time. That's one of my main qualms with self-help books, but actually with nonfiction in general a lot of the time, unless it's a biography. And another thing I liked, he really focuses on human nature and brings in psychological evidence for all of his messages. It's really all about working with the grain of our natural tendencies as humans rather than against them. Except, of course, for the part where he's like, boredom is even more detrimental to forming habits than failure is. So that's why you should fall in love with boredom so that you can push through it. And it's like, what? So except for that random part.
You know, I actually kind of agree with that, though. Like, not fall in love with boredom, but like, you can actually, I don't know, flip a switch in your brain where you're okay with boredom. Like, you're okay with just like, oh, relaxing for a second, letting your brain just sort of be a little empty and not have to be like turning around something. And you can actually come to enjoy that feeling. You can come to enjoy the familiarity. I don't know. I've had that experience, not of falling in love with boredom exactly, but of like, I enjoy the boring routine of my life right now. So I actually think you can do that. But I agree that the way he said it was kind of like, got it. Fall in love with boredom. Okay.
Right. And just to wrap up my first impressions, I especially loved how he took any guilt out of the picture because a lot of people have guilt surrounding the habits they want to form and the habits they haven't broken yet. So he's really good at that. And then he meets where you're at currently. And on top of that, he doesn't talk down to you. Like, I didn't feel like, there was this great master of his craft talking to a new Padawan, which, by the way, he's not even really a master of this craft. He just kind of figured it out through his work experience and talking to people. Oh, okay. I guess I'm going to keep talking. Not that I haven't been doing that enough already, but I got to give some background for the book. So, it's all about building habits in the smallest increments possible in order to increase the chances you'll stick with it. And basically letting time do the work for you. Because if you keep at it, even with like just 1% per day, you'll eventually get there and faster than you would expect.
Which is literally such good advice. Like, it is such good advice. Like, I did not need to read an entire 300-page book to get this advice, but it's really good advice. Because if you try and like do something that's very hard, you have to want it so bad to stick with it, and your life has to accommodate it. And therefore, you're like not going to do it most of the time. But if you can break it down small enough that you'll stick with it, like small enough that it's easy to do, then you can do it without just like pouring willpower out on this thing when you already have a bunch of other things in your life that you have to use up your willpower on. If you can minimize the expenditure of willpower, you can do it every single day and it adds up and you get used to doing it and then you can add more. And like, yeah, it's literally such good advice. If people just stopped thinking that they have to do something for an hour a day to get better at it, like literally do it for 5 minutes and you'll get way further than you will thinking you have to do it for an hour and therefore hardly ever doing it.
So he applies 4 laws to this method that you were just describing, and he corresponds it with 4 stages of habit building. Those 4 stages are cue, craving, response, and reward. That's a process that's going on in our brains continually on repeat. And then,
super sciencey.
Yeah, so the law that corresponds with these, cue, make it obvious, so whatever habit you're trying to do, say you're trying to make your bed in the morning. Oh, now I've really put a chore on myself trying to use an analogy. But yeah, making it obvious. Maybe you put a sign on your ceiling right above your head that says, make your bed. So that's your cue, right?
Or the cue is the unmade bed that you can't not notice when you walk into the room.
Yeah, there you go. And then make it attractive. So maybe you get better looking bedding so that you're more motivated to make it so it'll return to its beautiful state.
Maybe you hide candy in the folds of the bedding so that when you lift it back up and straighten it out, there it is, and you can eat the candy.
That's right. So make it attractive corresponds with craving, and then response is make it easy. So don't have 3 layers of sheets. Just have 1 sheet that you have to pull up, and then 1 comforter and maybe 1 pillow instead of 15 different pillows that you stack in a very proper manner.
Mm-hmm. And don't let the dog jump on your bed while you're trying to make it.
Yes. So that's response. And then reward corresponds with make it satisfying. So that would be the candy. I think that's where give yourself a piece of candy after you're done. Good job. I made my bed this morning. So yeah, those are the 4 fundamentals that all these concepts center around. And he also recommends doing the reverse of those laws in order to quit a bad habit. And I refuse to walk you all through that. I think you're smart enough to figure that out. Okay, read the book. It'll over-explain things.
Here's one thing I liked about the book. Earlier they were talking about like one of the first things you need to do to change a habit is like watch what you do, observe what you do without judging yourself. Sounds like the can't stop thinking lady. But he's like, you need to just like look and see what they're doing and just observe it as you would and like someone else doing it. Oh, look at that thing that they just did. How strange that they would do such a thing. And that is a verbatim quote. How strange that they would do such a thing. And I just wrote down, did Holly write this book?
It's so funny because I really liked reading that line. I was like, yes, so on point. It definitely boosted my admiration for this piece of literature by like 10%. So I would say my absolute favorite theme in this book was what he called the Plateau of Latent Potential. And I was thinking of making the graph for this, the cover image for this episode. If there's some copyright complications, then I'll just post it on our Instagram. Shameless plug, go follow us on Instagram at 2 Retired Homeschoolers. But yes, when I read this, I was so impressed. It was at this moment, for some unexplained reason, that my mic decided to act all wonky. There will be parts where I talk unusually and unnaturally fast, and there will be other parts where I sound groggly or cut out completely. We've done our best with editing, but we'll trust your faithfulness as loyal listeners will make up for the rest. Imagine that you have an ice cube sitting on the table in front of you. The room is cold and you can see your breath. It is currently 25 degrees. Ever so slowly, the room begins to heat up. 26, 27, all the way up to 31 degrees. Still nothing has happened. Then 32 degrees. The ice cube begins to melt. A 1 degree shift, seemingly no different from the temperature increases before it, has unlocked a huge change. Breakthrough moments are often the result of many previous actions which build up the potential required to unleash a major change. This pattern shows up everywhere. Cancer spends 80% of its life undetectable and then takes over the body in months. Similarly, habits often appear to make no difference until you cross a critical threshold and unlock a new level of performance. In the early and middle stages of any quest, there is often a valley of disappointment. You expect to make progress in a linear fashion, and it's frustrating how ineffective changes can seem during the first days, weeks, and even months. It doesn't feel like you are going anywhere. It's a hallmark of any compounding process. The most powerful outcomes are delayed. So I just like this because it illustrates the concept of delayed gratification so well, and the graph especially explains it like visually in a way that it's like, it's so much easier to keep at a habit in those difficult early stages once you understand this concept. So I'm going to try to make that available for our listeners.
If you can't, just by the way, the graph is an exponential curve.
Yes.
As opposed to a line, which is what you expect it to look like, he's saying. But instead it looks like an exponential curve, which goes up really fast once you get past 1. But as you're approaching 1, it's going up, like, it's below, like, when you've gone to half on the x-axis, you're still not to half on the y-axis, so it's like, seems to be going up slower. I didn't mean to get into way too much math there.
So the second concept I really loved was prioritizing maintaining the habit over progress. And here is another quote. The first mistake is never the one that runs you. It is the spiral of repeated mistakes that follows. So once you're trying to start a habit, you're going good at first, and then you mess up, and then it's like all or nothing. And so it's like, I might as well just keep messing up since I already did once.
Yeah, and people totally have that attitude. I don't know if I'm an inhuman exception. I just know it frustrates me exceedingly when that's the attitude people take. When I'm like, you made one mistake, you don't get to just stop being lazy and saying, oh, well, I ruined it. Now I can't do anything about it. No, just try again. It's okay that you made a singular mistake.
Yeah. I find it interesting that that's so convincing to my brain for whatever reason.
Maybe it's just never convincing to the person hearing the other person say it.
Whenever this happens to me, this is continuing with the quote, I try to remind myself of a simple rule, never miss twice. Too often we fall into an all or nothing cycle with our habits. The problem is not slipping up. The problem is thinking that if you can't do something perfectly, then you shouldn't do it at all.
There's a Chesterton quote, if a thing is worth doing, it is worth doing badly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. This is why the bad, in quotes, workouts are often the most important ones. Sluggish days and bad workouts maintain the compound gains you accrued. Is that the word?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I learned that once and also thought that it was very crude sounding. Anyway. Sluggish days. I'm clever, Rebecca. I am. Please believe me. Sluggish days and bad workouts maintain the compound gains you accrued from previous days. Simply doing something, 10 squats, 5 sprints, etc., is huge. Don't put up a 0. Don't let losses eat into your compounding.
Okay, do you love how so many of his examples in this book are always about working out?
Or they're business examples, which goes back to his work experience of working with athletes and entrepreneurs.
Yeah, for sure.
I did notice it's like, it seems like this guy is into sports.
Just a little bit.
Okay, did you want to add anything to that or bring up anything?
Nope.
Okay.
I don't think
Continuing on with Holly's monologue. Motivation is overrated. And this is also a continuation of me quoting this book because this book is so amazing. Which, by the way, what would you rate it on a range of 1 to 10?
Oh, 1 to 10?
Mm-hmm.
Like overall, not like for content versus for style? If I averaged by content and style ratings?
Yeah.
Well, I guess 5.5 would be the average of 3 and 8.
Guess my rating for it.
9.
I would give it an 8 just because of the over-explaining, but that's still pretty high.
Yeah, well, I would totally give it an 8, maybe even a 9 I would give it an 8 for content, but I would give it a 3 for style. So the average of 8 and 3 is... Nope, I did the math completely wrong. Yeah, no, it's 5.5.
Oh, interesting. Well, I guess that I'm also not turned off by structure, as you are. In fact, I kind of like structure. But you would...
Free spirit!
Maybe this is why I like the book overall. But have you heard of the podcast Books Can Kill? Or
No.
Books That Can Kill? Okay, it's...
Books That Can Kill?
Yeah, well, let me look it up. I think that's the official title. I just discovered it. So the podcast is called If Books Could Kill, with Michael Hotz and Peter Shamshiri. Yeah, it's pretty famous. And they reviewed this book, and I don't know if it was Michael or Peter, because I couldn't tell the difference between their voices, but...
You would never have that problem with us.
Oh, no. But one of them said that the book was badly written.
I mean, it's just annoyingly written. It's very it's just annoying to me. It's not like he can't use grammar or something. It's just annoying.
Yeah, which I was shocked by that. I was like, how could you say it's badly written? That's so extreme for a book that I, Holly Matthews, love. Okay, so anyway, to go back to my point, motivation is overrated. So this is I'm just pulling this out of context, so y'all get out of it what you will, but the Vietnam studies ran counter to many of our cultural beliefs about bad habits because it challenged the conventional association of unhealthy behavior as a moral weakness. And I definitely always thought of bad habits as a moral weakness, which to an extent I think it is. Like, the Bible talks about sin and addiction to sin, and, just because you're addicted to it doesn't mean that you get a free ride from justice?
Right.
But at the same time, addiction has a lot of psychological components that are like, okay, it doesn't help to guilt the person, and I don't think a lot of the time we should be making the person feel like it's all their fault, like that's not constructive for them getting over it.
Well, because at some point you make a choice, like your initial choice was a bad choice, and then as you get more and more addicted, I think to some extent you have less and less culpability because you have less and less choice in the matter. But your initial choice was your choice, and even the choices when you could do something about it were still your choices. There's this book, and there's a character. It's Brideshead Revisited, and there's a character in it who he's an alcoholic at the end of it. Like, he literally can't. He'll be sober for like a month, and then he can't help it, and he goes out and drinks until he runs out of money, and then he comes back and whatever. He's like probably gonna die an early death of alcoholism. But the thing is that one character says at that point he's not really culpable. He was culpable when he was in college, making life choices that led him to this point. But he's gotten to a point where he's simply sorry for the life choices that he made that led him here, and now he just has to deal with the consequences. Like, he's no longer culpable in his alcoholism. He is originally culpable, but now it's just what he's stuck with. And I'm not saying I know that I agree with the character, but I did think that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And certainly there's some truth in it. And yeah, that's kind of what I think about addiction, is that you just become less culpable as you become more addicted, but you are culpable because it was your choice to begin with. So both are true,
That's a good point. Yeah, and there's like a threshold that you cross where it's actually unhealthy, for instance, to completely stop smoking. Like, you have to wean yourself off of it. Not that smoking is a sin. I'm not that hardcore of a Baptist.
I'm not even that good of a Baptist that I think drinking alcohol is wrong in and of itself. But if you routinely drink too much, you can get to a point where you can do damage to yourself through the withdrawal.
Yeah. I was going to say, as far as the guilt aspect of this, and I don't know if I've talked about this before, but learning about the difference between condemnation and conviction was huge for me growing up. And guilt is like a natural response that's I don't know, I kind of see it as neutral, not really good or bad. It's just a natural response, so I guess it's good it's there. But it's really what you do with guilt or what you believe about guilt. Conviction, which comes from God, I believe, is all about, it's like your identity is up here, higher on this pedestal. And when you experience guilt, it's because almost like you've degraded yourself. You've brought your behavior down to a lower pedestal. And so that conflict is what guilt is signifying. And then condemnation is oh, look at your behavior. This is who you are. Since your behavior is all the way down here, your identity now comes down to the level of your behavior. And so it was really helpful for me to learn the difference between them, because guilt can definitely lead you to unhealthy behaviors if you don't understand that.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. That kind of reminds me of one of the things I was thinking as I read when he started off the book, he talked about how one of the best ways to change your habits is to think of it not as changing what you do, but changing who you are, or being who you are. Like, like instead of saying I don't do drugs, you say I'm not a person who does drugs. You know, like your identity is someone who works out. Your identity is someone who plays the violin. It's not something you're trying to do. It's something that you are, and therefore you have to do this to live up to who you are. And I was like, I get that, and I get why that would be effective, but I'm not completely sure that's like healthy to root your identity in your habits and activities. Like, does that seem a little
Yes.
potentially unhealthy? Like, what if you're a person who plays the violin, like your identity is I'm a violinist because you love it, and then you have some accident and you lose like 2 of the fingers on your left hand, and so you can't play the violin anymore. Like, that's just mentally damaging because you rooted your identity in it.
Well, and he also talks about that, I think, during the epilogue, or right before the epilogue. He says, when you're forming your identity, keep it like broad and very small at the same time. Like, instead of being like, I am a violinist, this is my identity, be like, I am a person who enjoys music and loves to use my brain in the same way that music challenges it. Like stuff like that. So it's not like, if you can't play the violin, your life is ruined.
But even yeah, maybe. Because it's not like you have to say, I am a person who likes music and enjoys using my brain in a musical way. It's not like that has to be the pinnacle of your identity. Because all of that was like making me think of like, really what your identity should be is I'm a Christian, and then everything serves that larger identity. But I guess it's good to have like your sub-identities, you know?
Oh, yeah.
I'm a Christian, and under that umbrella, I'm a violinist who does this. I'm a musical person who does this. Like,
which makes sense because God gives us certain gifts and we're just not meant to do some things, or we're not as good as those things as other things.
yeah.
But I do think it's true to the extent that often the story we tell ourselves about ourselves predetermines our behavior.
Often the story we tell ourselves about ourselves predetermines our behavior. I don't know. I know people say that, like psychology people and self-help people like to say stuff like that. And I think that it's not as cut and dried as that. I think that what you tell yourself informs your choices and actions, but I do not think it determines them. I think it always comes down to you have the choice to do something or to behave in a certain way. You may have like things that you've told yourself or done pushing you toward one decision over the other decision, but that decision is always there. And it's always very like, it's not like you feel pushed into making one decision and you couldn't make the other decision. Like, you're always able to make the decision. You're always able to change course. You're always able to do something that contradicts what you've believed and told yourself. And it's very actually easy to turn yourself around, kind of. Like, I'm a person who does this and this and this, but in the moment when the choice is there, you might be more likely to make the choice, but it's like a statistical likelihood. It's not like an almost fail-safe, yeah, you're going to do this. Like, choice exists, and it's always a pretty big toss-up, actually, what choice we're going to make. And anything like this, like that, or just I've heard multiple people say stuff like this, like, well, people are going to make this choice like as if it's so likely. My experience of making choices and stuff is just that you're always going to be aware that you have the choice, and so sometimes you're just going to make a different choice. You're really not that shaped by the narrative you tell yourself. You are much more shaped by like what choice you make in certain moments, and therefore indirectly by the narrative you tell yourself, because that's what goes into your thinking that leads you down to making the choices. But it's not such a deterministic process as it sounds like when they talk about it like that.
Yeah. I meant predetermined, I guess, in a wider sense. And that's good that you brought that up so I could clarify. But yeah, I mean, we do act in conflict with who we are as a person to a shocking degree as humans. At least I do anyway.
Yeah. And you're always 1 second away or one choice away from acting in conflict to it. Like, You're never far from that person who's the opposite of who you want to be.
That's a good point. Well, I will wrap up this thought with So in the same way that motivation is overrated, and I actually think the purpose of motivation personally is to get you started on a project or to get you started on the road to forming a habit. It's really not a long-term thing. So that, in my mind, is the purpose of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that very much.
Yeah. And then environment is often underrated.
That's true.
So a quote from the book, join a culture where your desired habit is the normal behavior. And yeah, it will become so much easier.
That's kind of interesting, especially, like, have you thought about that in a moral sense? Like, you want to set up a place where you're surrounded by people who make the right choices and who don't provide you with the temptation all the time to make the wrong choice. Like, yeah, that makes sense. It makes it easier for you to make the right choices. But which is more important, making the right choices or being the moral person? Because if you're never offered the opportunity, because, like, how can you have a virtue if you don't practice the virtue? And if you're never offered the temptation, then how do you ever practice the virtue? So is it, like, actually healthier or better for you to sometimes somehow encounter temptation? Because, like, there's kids that go not to, I don't know why I always end up making everything related to Christianity. It's just how it comes into my head. But, like, there's kids that will go to college and they've, like, been so sheltered in their little Christian life that they, like, have zero idea. They haven't wrestled with any doubts or any temptations to do things that they don't believe they should do. And, like, college hits them like a brick. And some of them are glass. And so the brick breaks the glass in the metaphor. But those people were surrounded by the people who live the way that they want to live and all that. But there's also the thing of, like, if you're always surrounded by a bunch of people who live in a way that you don't want to live, and so you're just constantly surrounded by temptation, it wears on you, and maybe it's hard not to give into it. Like, I can't decide if this is, like, good advice or bad advice from a moral standpoint.
I think it's good advice. I've always thought if I become a parent, like, as a Christian who intends to raise many Christians, hopefully.
You say, like, mini, like M-I-N-I, or many, like M-A-N-Y?
No, I'm not Mormon. I said mini, M-I-N-I. And I was going to say, yeah, I think that's actually pretty detrimental to their growth to only have them completely absorbed in an atmosphere where they don't even experience any temptation, because they will at some point. And if it's not while
they haven't had the like ability to build up their resistance to it. Like, they haven't practiced virtue. A virtue hasn't become a habit because it hasn't had to be a habit.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's just a product of their environment, really. And as a parent, your job is to help your kid think through things like, why am I making this one decision over this other decision? And how do I stand up under peer pressure? Like, those are things you should learn as a child versus as an adult, ideally. I mean, it doesn't always happen that way. And it's not always the parent's fault, but yeah.
Do you think you should send your kid to a crime-ridden public school and let them hang out with the bad kids every night? Because then they have lots of opportunity to practice building virtue by denying temptation?
Well, of course, it's a balance. The Bible says that you often become the person you surround yourself with, the people. Wow, that was phrased badly, but you know what I mean. Like, you surround yourself around these type of people and you become that type of person. So that's why in church they often say, like, just don't make them your closest friend, the less moral friends of yours.
Yeah, I don't think that's very good advice.
It's more just like, have a balance in your life. Don't, and also, you're not really doing any of the Lord's work if you're just constantly in your Christian bubble. Like, the Bible clearly states that we are sent and we're supposed to spread the gospel. So you can't even be performing the Great Commission if you're just always in your Christian bubble.
But you might be equipping other people within the Christian bubble who they have to go out of the bubble. So you're indirectly, if you're helping them.
I think it's important for everyone's faith to be involved out of the bubble to certain degrees. Like, some people, like Paul.
Why? Doesn't everyone have a different calling?
Yes, but also I think it's just important for your own personal faith. And it's also, like,
Why?
Because, like, if you're literally never doing any outreach and you're only prepping other people, then, like, you're not going to have any wisdom from the outer world on how to equip them properly. And it just feels too safe, you know? Like,
So it just doesn't appeal to you personally. I don't know that that means that it's never the right thing for anyone.
Let's just put it this way. The Christian leaders I've had in my life who have really never been outside the Christian bubble have made the least impact on my own faith journey. It's kind of like going out, doing the field work, so then you can talk about the field work.
Yeah, but also, like, I don't know. I don't think I agree with you, but it's okay. You can be wrong sometimes. I forgive you.
I'm allowed to be wrong. You're also allowed to continue talking about it.
It's hard. I'm having a hard time phrasing it. I guess I just think that some people always say things like, "Oh, you have to have seen like the worst to appreciate the best and whatever." And that's not entirely true. Like you can be a person who has always had a good life and a safe life, and you can make life way better for other people, and you can help them, you can, bring them joy, cook them food, teach them virtue by example, especially virtues like perseverance and patience and gentleness and kindness and listening. And like there's people who do kind of live in a bubble, but I guess I would say that I have not only been positively affected by people who've, seen it all. Like I've also been positively affected by much more insulated people. Like maybe they never have gone far out of their bubble, but they have made their bubble such a much better place. Like they've grown where they were planted, and where they were planted wasn't on top of a windy mountain. It was down in a sheltered little valley. But all the people in that sheltered little valley who sometimes have to go up on the windy mountain are really, really appreciative of this other person who stays in the sheltered valley and teaches them stuff and makes food for them and is great. You don't have to be the person who's gone up on the mountain to bring value to the other people who have to go up on the mountain sometimes.
Okay, and just to make sure we're on the same page here, I was talking specifically about A, sharing your faith with unbelievers, and B, exposure to unbelievers, which we all have exposure to unbelievers to an extent, but some Christians seem to actively avoid it, which I don't think is healthy.
Yeah, I don't know why you would actively avoid it. I think some people do find themselves just in a life situation where they really don't interact with them that much, though, right?
Yeah.
That's more what I mean. I mean, people who their life situation is simply that they pretty much only interact with, beyond maybe buying groceries at the store or something, with other believers, and they really have never had a time in their life when they did that, and so they don't go around evangelizing. What they do is they go around quietly supporting other believers, and those other believers may not realize it, but they are supported by that. That's very valuable to them. That's very valuable in their witness to other unbelievers as well. They can often learn certain virtues from these people who, they've never had very much exposure to unbelievers, and they've never shared, or they don't go around sharing their faith with unbelievers. But they have other virtues that these Christians who do share their faith with unbelievers have learned from. And basically, I just think, I'm not saying this well, but I just think that there are people like that who are doing exactly what they're supposed to. They're blooming exactly where they're planted. And I just think there is a place for people like that, I don't think every single person has to evangelize. Because I think everyone indirectly does.
That's really interesting. And I guess I'm inclined to agree with you, at least on a certain level. I'm not saying I disagree, but I'm glad you put it that way. That makes me think more about it. And I guess I suppose it is possible that God would have a plan for someone's life in which it is exactly what you described for the person who never goes up the mountain. And if that is the case, then obviously you are correct. So I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
I don't know either. I did think it was interesting to think about, though. Anyway, do we want to get back on track?
The last thing I wanted to talk about is goals restricting your happiness. And I don't think everyone struggles with this, but I definitely do. So this was more of a personal thing. And just to pull out a few quotes. Furthermore, goals create an either-or conflict. Either you achieve your goal and are successful, or you fail and are disappointed. You mentally box yourself into a narrow version of happiness. This is misguided. It is unlikely that your actual path through life will match the exact journey you had in mind when you set out. A system-first mentality provides the antidote. When you fall in love with the process rather than the product, you don't have to wait to give yourself permission to be happy. You can be satisfied any time your system is running. And a system can be successful in many different forms, not just the one you first envision. And I really connect with that because I remember there was literally a time in my life where I was like, I just feel so overwhelmed by all my goals. Like, I don't even like the word goal anymore. Like, even if I were to cast out all my goals but one, I would still hate my one goal.
Yeah, I agree. I liked how I put more emphasis on systems than goals. I've never been a goal type of person. Like, you say, I want to achieve this goal, and like, okay, that doesn't get you any closer to achieving it. But if you say, okay, I'm gonna like structure my life like this or start doing this, that's like a practical way to actually get to the goal. Like, saying the goal is not practical. Setting the system in place is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everyone. Now Holly has explained to you how to have atomic habits. She's kind of explained how to like make good habits by making them easy, attractive, satisfying, whatever. But this also works in the opposite direction. If you have a bad habit that you want to get rid of, you make it invisible, you make it difficult, you make it unsatisfying, and or whatever the four things are. So we're gonna play a little game
Don't feel shame.
to illustrate. We're going to illustrate the point of this book for you and give you an example. Like, this book is always giving examples. You know, I don't care about examples that self-help books give me because they're like telling me a story and it's like, I don't care about this story because it's not about the story. It's just about like what little clever point you're going to make with the story. Anyway, we're going to figure out how to end the bad habit of putting vehicles in large bodies of water. I've done it twice now, so if you do it once, it's whatever. But once you do it again, once you repeat the action, it's becoming a habit. So, Holly, what is the first way to make a bad habit harder to do?
Make it obvious. So in your case, you're going to try to make it invisible.
Make it invisible. Okay, so close your eyes when you drive, right?
Or there's alternate versions of this. You could drive an invisible vehicle, or you could never drive near water.
Yes.
Yes.
That would be like, I would never imagine if I couldn't drive anywhere near water where I live. Like, I would just be like, I can't go there. I have to drive like I can't cross the bridge. It's too close to the water. I'd have to drive all the way around the lake. That's going to take me like 5 hours. And they're like, no, it only takes 30 minutes. No, it's going to take me 5 hours. I can't drive near water.
Yeah, that would definitely throw a lot of obstacles in your life. So take a pick, I guess, whichever one sounds the most interesting. I would go for the invisible car, personally.
I like the invisible car. I do. Okay, so we're going to make my car invisible. We're also going to make the golf cart that I put in the pond invisible. I made it invisible by sinking it under the water. So, you know.
Okay, our next step is making it unattractive.
My car has some rust on it. But we know it's not about the car, it's about the water. I was going to say we could bang up my car a little more. You know, it got smashed by a bus and it has rust on it, but
I was going to say, or you could develop a phobia for water, which isn't very practical because you survive by drinking water, but, you know, we could work on it.
in my quest to never drive a car into a lake again, I have to take all my hydration via IV because I can't bear to swallow the stuff.
No. Okay, now you're going to try to make it as difficult as possible. I guess to drive.
Okay, I'm going to dismantle my gas pedal. You think that'll work?
Or you could, like, drive with your elbows. You know how you can kind of hold the wheel between your elbows as you're putting up your hair?
Uh-huh.
So, like, no hands.
Yes, I'll leave my parking brake on at all times.
Okay, perfect. That one was easy. Too easy for being difficult. Make it satisfying or unsatisfying.
Make it unsatisfying. Make it unsatisfying. I'm going to have to set up some unpleasant experiences like every time I go to the lake. Go to the lake, a lightning storm occurs and hits my car. Can I set that up with the weatherman? Go to the lake and, mosquitoes attack.
Or, you could attach little floaties to each of your wheels, so when you do run into water and you float, it's like you don't get that satisfying experience that you so love of sinking. That was the solution to all these problems.
A genius, Holly. A pure genius. So there we go. That's an example for everyone. Drive with your parking brake up and attach floaties to your car, and you will not have any bad habits.
Should we wrap up?
I guess we should wrap up. I have one favorite quote. Do you?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead and read that. I pretty much went through my favorite quotes.
Oh, it was just like a kind of, work hard at what comes easy. I was like, yeah, that's good. Like, pick the right things to work hard at.
Yeah.
Like, don't be like me and work really, really hard at archery and deform your finger and freeze your fingers off and make your arm black and blue and because you're trying so hard to just be a good archer when you have no archery talent and you will never be a good archer no matter how hard you try.
It's so sad.
Pick something that you have talent at,
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll stop driving then.
Good idea.
To bring things full circle. Okay, thank you everyone for listening to the 19th episode of the Two Retired Homeschoolers. Join us in 3 weeks to hear about The Two Towers by Tolkien himself with a special guest, Isaac Vogel. And we'll see you all later. Bye. Some other things you can do in addition to following us on Instagram is subscribing and liking this video if you're on YouTube, which, by the way, speaking of platforms, this podcast is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So if you have a weird family member who actually uses Apple Podcasts, definitely let them know that this exists so that they can rate and review, because that's a thing you do on podcast platforms. And thank you so much, by the way, for rating this podcast so that we now have an official 5-star rating on Spotify. Yes, Rebecca? This is the moment when Rebecca returned from fetching her computer charger and rightly guessed the context of my conversation with no one in particular.